Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's weekly look at the news agenda. But before we go there, just one announcement. This year, our national conference is on Saturday, the 22nd of April. That's Saturday, the day before St George's Day. This year it is in Birmingham, and I hope you will join us. It was a great success last year when we had it in London. I hope it's an even better event this time in Birmingham. So if you would like to find out about it, or indeed if you want to purchase tickets, then please do go to the link below. Very, very straightforward. And we hope to see you there on the 22nd. I think it'll be a great get-together. So this week we've had a number of issues in the news which have highlighted certainly problems we have now with free speech. First of all, we had Posie Parker, woman's rights campaigner, facing down a mob of almost rabid trans activists in Auckland in New Zealand. And also there was the rather sad spectacle of the author Richard Dawkins on the Piers Morgan show on Talk TV, in which he appeared to not to want to talk about various subjects. And indeed, this really did affect a lot of people, including myself, in its sheer starkness. And finally, there is a new leader in Scotland, Humza Yousaf, who, being the new leader of the SNP, is also therefore the new First Minister, and we will be looking at that. So, first of all, I want to go to Posie Parker, gentlemen. Of course, senior fellows here, Rafe, Heydel-Mankoo, Dr. Philip Kiszely. This was quite an extraordinary spectacle. What has struck me about it was the fact that there has been not a single declaration of support that she's had from anyone who you could call a senior politician. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be that way. This is very telling, is it not?
Yeah, I think it's the case. I mean, just looking at the footage, and there's plenty of footage. That's the good thing about this, actually. There is lots of footage there. You can see the baying mob.
Awful.
It's good in the sense that there's evidence there. Okay, and you can juxtapose that evidence to what the great and good are saying. In other words, they don't. You introduced her as a women's rights activist. They always talk about her as an anti-trans activist, and that's not the case at all. She's just a women's rights activist. It's very simple, actually. Her message is very simple. She just wants spaces for women. That's it. The aggression and the violence and the vitriol that's been visited upon her is just utterly remarkable. She's become a symbol of the fight, and in lots of ways she's been dehumanized because of that. And the mob were just baying for blood.
Is it right that she actually came up with that term adult human?
I'm not sure about that.
I think she's coined it. It's the dictionary definition.
She certainly has it on
T-shirts.
She's popularised it. Certainly,
adult human. The definition of a woman, that is, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I found remarkable was that the most vitriol she's faced, and the most hatred, and the most physically intimidating form of resistance has been in Australia and New Zealand, and I found this quite remarkable. You know, we're talking about Australia, the land of scorpions and spiders and crocodiles, and yet they don't seem to be able to handle an English woman coming over wanting to let women speak, which is the actual name of her organisation. What's happened to this land of Crocodile Dundee? And so I read one article which said, our Sheilas will not be silenced. And I thought, absolutely the case. And it just goes to show you, when somebody lives as far away as Europe from Australia and New Zealand, in any country, it's so easy to vilify the outsider where they don't have regular exposure to these people. It's easy to portray them as being so far beyond the pale that they must be resisted. And it's almost as if this hysteria overtook parts of New Zealand and Australia in the way that they were dealing with a very normal, regular woman. She became almost the Antichrist.
Well, she became a Nazi. Yeah. I mean, basically, that's it.
And she became a Nazi. And what was very telling also was how the institutions were complicit in this. You had, in Australia, you had a senator draping herself in an Aboriginal flag, who even the police threw to the ground because they wouldn't let her try to attack Posie and her compatriots, and she ended up crawling over the ground to get to her fellow trans activists. And I thought, this is a senator of Australia. Again, we saw similar scenes in New Zealand. But what happened in New Zealand, the police were absent. It was the private security guards who defended her. And surely they would have expected this to happen. And were the police actually absent as an act of a deliberate policy?
Yeah, I think it surprises me about Australia to a certain extent. It doesn't surprise me about New Zealand at all, because that's the home of woke, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, but isn't Australia now too? I mean, we're talking about that we're being surprised, but this is all of a piece with their reaction to the pandemic.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But I always think about New Zealand in particular, and I think you're right about Australia actually. But for me, New Zealand is bound up with the Ardenne, with the leader. And I think of New Zealand in the same way that I think about Canada now.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting things about looking at the footage, but also that incredible image of Kellie-Jay Keen, Posie Parker, with all of the, what is it, tomato soup or tomato ketchup all over it, and it looks like blood. Interestingly, she has very cleverly turned that image into an icon of victory, I think, because it just shows them up for what they are, and she looks like a bloodied woman standing up for her rights and standing up for what is right. And I think it's incredible that she's done that. I mean, I'm a great supporter of hers. I think she's brilliant.
Well, she's been on the channel.
Yeah.
She's a tiny lady.
She's 5'1".
Very small. And there were bits of the footage we've all seen where, they are closing in on her. I think she herself said if she went down, she thought she would never get up. And
Well, she said, I mean, I don't agree with her on everything that she says, but absolutely, I find there's a lot to say for her position that she holds. But she said that every police officer she spoke to said if she had fallen down, she likely would have been killed. It was that sort of a situation that we're witnessing here.
I was following the story on Saturday, and some of the tweets from the trans radical activists. I don't want to call them that, actually. I want to call them anti-female terrorists. I think that describes them much more clearly and better for what they are. But some of the tweets, people were sharing the tweets, were some of these activists were saying that they were getting sexually turned on by the fear in her eyes.
Really?
It's that kind of depravity that she's dealing with. And if you look at the scenes, and again, I've already said this, but if you look at the footage, I can't think of a stronger case for keeping biological men out of women's spaces than that footage and that baying mob.
Well, the misogyny was so visceral, so obviously apparent there, and it wasn't just misogyny. It was also young men attacking middle-aged to elderly women.
Broke her jaw.
And you had Australian women there in their 60s who were there to speak. The event is called Let Women Speak. And what do you have? A bunch of cowardly men trying to drown out women's voices. And you remember back in the 1960s and 70s in America, you famously had the black activists, the Black Panthers. Well, because these chaps we have here with Antifa and in Australia and New Zealand, I've seen them referred to now as the Black Pampers, which I quite like, a lot. I think they're good. But yeah, they're coddled, but yet they are, of course, as always, what we find, the be kind mob are the least kind, and the tolerant are the least tolerant.
Yeah, we talked a few months ago, didn't we, on this show about these causes. So the transgenderism cause is one, the environment is another. And I remember when we had Poppy Coburn on as a guest, and she was saying, and we all agreed with her, that the environmental stuff is going to move from activism into terrorism quite soon. This lot have trumped that in a way, haven't they? Because it has become terrorism. If we look at the events in Tennessee over the last few days, then it's tragic.
You're referring to the shooter.
I'm referring to the shooting of Christian children because they're Christian children. But if we look at the Posie Parker incident as well, this is clearly turning into terrorism. And so this is, in a way, this is the issue that really might help. It's the point I was making at the beginning, actually, really might help people who follow this thing because they follow the latest thing and they want to be fairly virtuous and they think that's what it is. This really exposes it for what it is, and it's really quite evil, I think.
It's interesting, because I was speaking to Claire Fox for a program we're doing it's going to go out after this. She was making the point that when you look at what happened in Scotland on this trans issue, it effectively meant that Nicola Sturgeon imploded, over that. And that in fact, therefore, it was down to a kind of constitutional position, i.e. what happened with Rishi Sunak and the fact that he vetoed it and everything. And I sort of took issue slightly with that because, of course, for the same reason you're saying, people surely have to look at this sort of stuff too, that's happening to Posie Parker, and there are many others like it. And they have to somehow become. You have to reach a critical mass where people say enough. That they can. This is a crunch point. I hate using that word tipping point, but this is a crunch point. People have got to see this stuff for themselves.
I think something has happened, and I think lots of people. I think of it as an onion, and these kind of followers are the outer layer, and it seems as though they're stripping off because they're saying, these people aren't ideological particularly. They're not ideologically driven. It's just people who follow the latest thing, and lots of people do that. But you can see them, and I know I'm following it really quite closely. You can see them saying, no, enough is enough, this is wrong. And one thing is really important, they're thinking about their children. They're really thinking about their children, what's happening in schools, and how the activist element of this, I'm not talking about all trans people, I'm talking about the activist element of this, is aggressively targeting children.
Well, actually, Tom Slater has a piece in the editor of Spiked Online has a piece about just this, and it says, whatever your position is on all of these issues, we all have to take a stand. In fact, Let Women Speak have also been silenced at Speaker's Corner, where they appear once a month, and he's encouraged everyone to actually turn up at Speaker's Corner in order to actually defend them there, because you are actually defending the issue of free speech. Because you're quite right, Philip. Then we have a Prevent programme, and Prevent is designed to stop radicalisation. And it's not just Islamic extremists and some on the far right who are being radicalised. It's the trans radicals. I mean, the clues in their name, but the trans radical activists who are also being radicalised. And it's this othering. Anybody with an opposing viewpoint ceases to have any dimension other than being the enemy, who must be. And it is going to get to a point, as with eco-terrorism, where you're going to, I think, unfortunately, see more increasingly violent such situations happening. So I think it's vitally important that people do take a stand. But I'm not that optimistic because, of course, we hope people would take a stand after the Charlie Hebdo
and of course it didn't happen.
After the beheading of Patty, after what we saw in Batley, people don't take stands, and that's the problem.
Yes, but the one thing I'd add to that is that in the Telegraph this morning, we're recording this on a Wednesday. In the Telegraph this morning, there's a piece about the fact of how many teachers in our schools are encouraging or allowing for possible gender, re-identification without the parents being told. Now, it's actually quite a large figure. Was it 40, something like that? 40% of schools. So basically, parents will become more aware of this. And basically, when children are involved, that's what might make the difference. To your point,
I think it is.
That
you
basically
talk about a tipping point. That if there is going to be a tipping point, it's going to be involved with children.
Yeah, that somehow people now, what exactly are they being taught at school? This is a safeguarding issue, isn't it? You talk about prevent, but this has been introduced by the schools themselves.
I think Policy Exchange have just issued a report on this today, I think. So
that is the one in the Telegraph.
That's the one in the Telegraph. So it'd be interesting to look at that. I suppose just finally on this, there's quite an amusing postscript actually. I mean, it's tragic and it's awful, but actually this is quite funny. The British Communist Party, do you know about this? The British Communist Party have come out as being pretty gender critical, and everybody on the left is having a meltdown, but all the gender critical people are going, ha, the British Communist people. I think it's important to remember for those people that communism is still daft.
Just before we do leave it, actually, though, how, we're sort of, you're sceptical about, the changes that will come. I'm possibly a little bit hopeful. What do you think it will mean for the general woke kind of movement? Long time ago, Rod Liddell on this programme said he thought that the trans issue would be peak wank, as he called it. That's before this kind of display we've had. But I mean, is it too much to ask that somehow this might be a turning point?
Well, I think Rod Liddell was saying that it was going to be women's sports that was going to be the turning point.
We've seen that change.
And we've just seen now, of course, the World Federation of Athletics, or whatever it is, which I thought, at one point, I thought, well, this actually is the turning. This is finally people have realised this. But I think what's going to happen is the prevailing consensus will be, oh yes, well, sports is the exception, because there clearly is a physical difference. But in all other areas of life, we actually are going to see this great change happening.
I think there'll just be a divide, more of a divide, and I think it'll be a clearer divide. At the moment, it's not that clear, is it? Because up until now, many people have kind of gone along with it, because many people don't turn up at school and say, what the hell are you teaching my children? They don't. They just let it happen. But now I think people are beginning to push back on that. But I think it's going to bifurcate. I think there's going to be a very definite divide. People who are absolutely disillusioned with it, but the hardliners are going to absolutely double down. And the bad news is they still dominate the institutions.
Yeah. No, it's quite frightening watching them in action, isn't it? Sort of related, because this is a speech issue, for goodness sake, isn't it? There was this very alarming clip on Twitter this week. I know maybe a lot of you aren't on Twitter, but in fact we will show it in a bit, but I should just set it up for you. So Richard Dawkins, who is obviously famous best-selling author, written about religion. He's a famous atheist, and he was on Piers Morgan's show on Talk TV, and just want to show you a little clip because it sort of almost speaks for itself.
Yes, I'm not going to say about that.
Are you worried about, do you get threats because of the positions you've taken on some of these things? When you saw what happened to Salman Rushdie, didn't send a shudder through you? Are you saying no, you don't want to talk about it? Or
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's interesting in itself. Because there are areas which you would prefer not to discuss.
Yes. I should have said that before we started.
When I saw this, I was appalled, not at him, because I sort of can understand in a way. I was appalled that somehow we had actually got to this sort of position. Was that your reaction, mate?
I found it utterly chilling, actually. It was absolutely chilling. We often say on this channel that we are in a position of privilege because we don't have any bosses, we're uncancelable, this is what we do in think tanks, and it applies equally, even more so, to people like the J.K. Rowlings, the authors who are independent, who can speak freely without the repercussions that people who are perhaps working companies don't have. And one of those great free speech champions was always Richard Dawkins. This was a man who freely condemned the hypocrisy and the abuses that were committed not just in Christianity, but particularly in Islam. He spoke out against apostasy, the fact that so many Muslims believe he should be put to death for leaving the faith. He spoke out against honour killings. He spoke out about all the terrorist activities that happened, and he made a point of saying that he was doing this because Muslims were the biggest victims of Islamism. And suddenly to have this person of all feeling unable to comment not even on the most incendiary topics, just about things like Shamima Begum, for example. And I thought, what is this? Is this actually the woke mob and cancellation, or is it actually a response to Salman Rushdie being attacked?
Well, he mentioned he wouldn't speak about...
And he wouldn't speak about Salman Rushdie.
Well, I mean, on a personal level, as far as he's concerned, I mean, you can completely understand it. And he must be, 80, 81 now?
82.
Or something? Oh, is he 82?
Really?
Okay. Yeah. Well, and he's thinking about his family. I can understand that. And he's thinking about the rest of his life. But it really reminded me, just seeing him talking and seeing him it was his body language as much as anything, actually. It's seeing him cowed and not knowing what to say, Richard Dawkins not knowing what to say. It reminded me of seeing torture victims being showboated on things like Iranian TV or in the old Soviet days, and being forced to spout the party line. It was exactly that, and it was one of those moments, I think everybody felt it, where if ever we've really got to fight back, push back, and champion free speech, it's in the face of that.
Exactly. I mean, you mentioned, you think of torture in the Soviet Union. For me, it was sort of like The Godfather, you know, when the mafia would silence witnesses who then would go into the witness box and suddenly change their tune and not have anything to say because of the fear of repercussions. And that's basically what we've got now, is this sort of a mafia type of fear tactic being used to stifle opposition and to stifle views which certain elements of our society, radical extremists from Islam, or indeed with, as we saw with Posie Parker, on the trans side, who want to stifle opposition. And you're quite right. These sorts of things make us realise suddenly, sit up sharply, and take note that things are happening at such a pace now. Yeah. When someone like Dawkins is too scared to speak up, we really are getting to a crisis point.
Go on.
Yeah, no, I was going to say though, exactly. My feeling when I watched it was, I look, you know, when it comes to his writing and his novel, his books about religion, is it unfair to say that he's particularly gone for Christianity? Would you say? Is it unfair?
Well, he's a Christian, and we're living in a Christian country, and Christianity is the dominant religion of the West.
Right. Fair enough.
But he's been very clear in the past to say that he's called Islamism a vile, for example, and he said, why is it fine for me to criticize Christianity and get a free pass, but I can't criticize Islam? Because he was famously cancelled in the past from a very, very prominent Californian radio station, whereas for his Islamic views, even though they wanted him on to discuss Christianity on the same points.
Well, this is the whole point, isn't it? When essentially, I mean, when I looked at it, I sort of thought, you know, I didn't feel, actually, I didn't think he was a coward or anything like that. I sort of thought, we have got to this stage because we have shown zero, like Posie Parker, zero real kind of fortitude in standing up. And no senior politician, at least I can think of, has said anything. All it would have taken with this Richard Dawkins clip, surely, as soon as that went up, it would have required no effort. All you needed was a senior politician, for example, from our government, to write a tweet saying, how appalling is this? We stand for free speech, etc., etc. Even just a tweet. Nothing. No. Nothing. And then we wonder why this happens.
That's absolutely right. If the British government had actually taken a firm stand on that teacher in Batley, had taken a firm stand when those boys were suspended for the damage or the little scuff mark on the Quran, if they had taken a strong stance on all of these issues when they arisen, I'm pretty sure Richard Dawkins and others would feel far more confident in speaking out and speaking freely and openly. But they know they will get no institutional support.
No, it's the cowardice of the institutions, and that cowardice has grown and grown and grown over the last decade or so. And I see that footage. And it's all linked for me. I see the footage of Posie Parker, and I see the reaction, the top-down reaction to Posie Parker, and the complete non-reaction to this, and other reactions to gender-critical women from, say, the University Lecturers Union, who've just completely thrown gender-critical people under the bus. I see that, and it breaks my heart. I'm frightened for the future.
No, it's simply appalling on this issue again of free speech, or actually, and its adjacent cousin, hate speech. The man who's just been elected to be leader of the SNP, Scotland, of course, is the same individual who was behind, if I am correct, the
policing of
spreading of hate speech into the domestic arena in Scotland. Well, what do you make of him? His name is Humza Yousaf. What is your view on what you've seen?
I'd been following it in a kind of vague way, and one of the things that I suppose I thought, like most other people, was immediately when they chose him, I thought, oh, they've chosen a race baiting loon. You know, how nice for them. Same as usual. You know, okay, it was gender with Sturgeon primarily. You know, but she was on the same road. But they've just chosen another radical nutcase. I mean, I think it was the footage you showed.
We should show it actually before we go on. Actually, this is a little clip from last year, I believe. Let's have a look.
Take my portfolio alone. The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The head of the Law Society, white. The head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every prison governor, white. And not just justice. The Chief Medical Officer, white. The Chief Nursing Officer, white. The Chief Veterinary Officer, white. The Chief Social Work Advisor, white. Almost every trade union in this country headed by people who are white. In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white. Every chair of every public body is white. That is not good enough.
You see, when I look at that, actually, Sayford, to me it looks like he's venting spleen. You know, again, it's the way he spits out the word white in this. It's quite extraordinary. Can you imagine if it was said about anyone else?
It's almost like he's got an insect in the back of his throat and he's spitting it out and spitting it out. Good side is, of course, for unionists that I think independence is going to be kicked into the long grass for a generation or so.
Do you look at it that way?
Well, as one of my American friends would say, he wouldn't have lasted a New York minute had he spoken the same way about black people, for example, or anything else. And of course, conveniently forgetting to mention to people that Scotland is 96% white.
It's actually more. Let's get it right. It's 96.02.
Yes. 0.02% white. So what do you expect? You know, someone like John Cleese. What do you expect when you look out of a talkie window? You know, to see. This is what's absolutely appalling about this chap is the ability to try to just play politics with actual facts and not actually tell the real story and the real truth. But you're quite right. This is an appalling day for Scottish people, but it's a glorious day for the union and for unionism, because he's also a completely ineffectual leader. He's uncharismatic in the same way that people feared Sturgeon and Salmon, and they're really impressive abilities to get people to vote for them. His track record is very bad. I think he's called unofficially Humza Useless rather than Humza Yousaf because of his poor performance on so many important things which are real issues in Scotland right now. In health and transport and so forth, and the attainment gap and the divide between rich and poor. And he's also exposed the fissures within the SNP. The SNP was so united before, and he's basically got this small little coterie around him. He's alienated Forbes, who was his main rival, and so now you're seeing he was only elected with 52% of the SNP vote. So the SNP have never been in a weaker position. But if I can just go on, there was a photograph that was displayed, which perhaps we can show on screen of his first day in office. And it was of him and 4 or 5 of his male family at prayer in Bute House, the official residence. And just think what would have happened if his rival, Forbes, who lost in large part because of her Christian beliefs, had held a prayer meeting. There would have been uproar from the Guardianistas, from Novara Media, from all the usual sources. There would have been, fears for the future of gay rights, fears for all of these futures.
The dissonance is just insane, isn't it? This is this terribly racist country. This is fascism. It's absolutely nonsense. But if we can just reflect for one moment on the policing of speech in the home, which he was really behind and really championing, wasn't he? It's a chilling prospect for the Scots.
Well, wait a minute, hasn't it actually gone true? I think it's gone through.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's that it's a chilling prospect for the Scottish people now to be worried about sitting around the dinner table and being frightened because your children might report you to the authorities.
I think the thing with that photograph you mentioned actually as well, absolutely correct. I would go so far as to say she almost might be gone if it had been her fault. But with that as well, is that you can't even use the excuse, it was in private. It was an issued photograph. It was presumably...
Scotland claims to be the most progressive country on the planet. You can imagine, the scene if it had been 4 men having a Christian meeting, right? Yeah. There was the misogyny, but behind that image would have been so rich on the headlines.
All the same
colour as well. All the same colour, and yet it's perfectly fine here. And the idea that the Calvinist religion of Forbes is somehow less appealing or less dangerous then of Islam, when we know full well about the degree of support for apostasy, the degree of misogyny, the degree of homophobia, all values that supposedly stand against what progressive Scotland stands for, and yet it's amazing. And it's not just an anti-Christian thing, because if you look at these commentators who were silent about this photograph of this Islamic prayer meeting, or who actually praised it, these were the same voices who were saying it doesn't mean anything that Rishi Sunak is a Hindu leader, because he's actually a cover for Tory white supremacy.
Yeah, it's the hypocrisy.
It's not enough just being you have to be of the right religion too. There's only one right religion, and that's Islam.
It's not the white religion.
But I think, but basically, some left-wing writers have written about this very unholy alliance between the hard left, or even for that matter, the soft, soppy left, and Islam, in the sense that they're seen as almost like my enemy's enemy is my friend.
That's exactly what it is, and I think it's a marriage of convenience that I think over the next few years is going to end in a really messy divorce.
Well, history shows us full well that how much of useful idiots the left are. You just have to look at the Iranian Revolution, where you had the left-leaning students teaming up with the extreme radical Islamic fundamentalists, and of course we know full well what happened then. They were all strung up. So let that be a lesson for those.
And the fact that the radical left don't learn.
Spoken like a true private eye reader.
and just to make a final point, just that the radical left don't learn, because we still have, or we did have until a few years ago, Jeremy Corbyn going there on Press TV and carrying on regardless.
I think one of the worst things that you mentioned about the French there, was it Michel Foucault who arranged for leaflets to be dropped over Iran? Was it? Do you remember that he was the French intelligentsia were very in favour actually of Ayatollah Khomeini. I'm talking about 1979. There's another one, a good example. Oh, went back, get rid of the Shah, get rid of the Shah. Little did they know.
Well, it's probably the world's leading place for sex change operations, because they're so homophobic. They would rather gay men became trans.
Yes. Well, I mean, good Lord. Any other points you want to bring up this week?
It's a great note to end on.
Anything?
It's a great note to
exactly,
end on.
Extraordinary. Thank you very much, Philip. Thanks very much, Rafe. That's it for Newspeak this week. We got really riled up there. Anyway, we shall see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.